Just by a show of hands, how many people are using AI in your practice of any type of AI? And where are most people from? Are most people from Australia or from abroad? From the US? Okay, great. I have a bit of an interesting background in the sense that I do have an MBA. I was a department chair. I was chief medical officer for a while. And in our current practices right now, we have about 19 different softwares that we're using for artificial intelligence. So it's a little bit of a unique experience. The other thing that I work as well as, and I don't, it's not a conflict of interest, but I work for a large purchaser and payer organization. So in the United States, we have a very complex healthcare system. And I talk about the 6 Ps of healthcare, which are the patients and the providers, which we are the providers, the purchasers and the payers, and the policy and the politics. So at least in my journey, I've been in all 6 of those. And one of the challenges that we do have when we talk about artificial intelligence is who's going to purchase artificial intelligence? Who's going to purchase this? Anybody know what this is? This is the Justice League. It's basically Superman and the Green Hornet and Wonder Woman and so on and so forth. And so when artificial intelligence came out, I've always felt that if there is a problem, there is a solution. So even in this meeting that's only been going on for about a day and a half, I've heard some things about AI, how it's going to take over the world, right? I mean, there's so much hype about AI. And right now, and this is from the American College of Radiology. So right now, the American College of Radiology has a data center. And right now, there are 421 different software as medical devices. There's actually 421 of those. So basically, if you have a problem, there's going to be an AI solution. So from an innovation standpoint, there's no shortage of innovation in AI. But having said that, as we kind of go through this talk, what I want to do is give you some things to think about, because all of you will be using AI. So when you look at AI right now, and this is from the US, about 200 products right now just for chest radiology. You've got about 135 right now for the brain and the neck. Then you've got about 33 for the abdomen. So there's really no shortage of products that you can use. And so because of this, that's why I kind of use this analogy for the Justice League, right? There is an armada of ways that we can solve some of the solutions or the problems that we have in radiology. So AI started for me like in around about 2016. You'll see the slide later. But as I mentioned before, there are 400 products. So we use about 19 of them in our practice. But something interesting started happening to AI. So we started implementing AI, and basically this was a paper that was published in the AJNR in 2021. And when this company, and I don't really know the company at all, they claimed a sensitivity of 92% and a specificity of 89%, which is pretty good, right? So he said, this is great. I have for fractures, we can achieve this. But what happened in this situation was that they published their actual results. And the results were the following. This is from that paper. The sensitivity in the real world was only 55% compared to what was claimed at 92%. And then the positive predictive value was only about 40%. So I'm not a mathematician by any stretch, but I think 50% is a lot different than that. And so the first point that I want to make about AI, because as I'm going through this meeting and I see all the softwares and the promises of diagnostic accuracy that have been made, those diagnostic accuracies have to be submitted to the US Food and Drug Administration. These companies, and they're very clever about this, they don't promise you that they're going to achieve that. They claim our accuracy is 92%. But they don't promise it. The reason why they have to achieve this, so when you look at all the products, the sensitivity and specificity are about the same. They're sort of high 80s, low 90s. And the reason they do that is that in order to get a product cleared by the FDA just wants to make sure the product is safe. How do you determine safety? They want to make sure the product doesn't harm the patient. And number two, if you do switch to the product, they want to make sure that the product has some equivalency to a human reading it. Because the FDA is not going to say, okay, you have a 60% diagnostic accuracy, but the human has 90%. If they approve the product, that's not safe. So the point is that when they talk about this, this is just to get them through the door. It doesn't mean that it's going to function as well as you do, but one of the misconceptions that you'll see as you start looking at the AI products is take this with a grain of salt. And you'll see what I mean by this, because when you actually look in the real world and you have this type of discrepancy, you know something's wrong. So what causes that? And I will say one thing about Carpal about this is that I've learned a lot working for them because they have a website that's called Unboxing AI. And they have about 60 different webinars. And I've listened to each one of these. And you learn a lot about how these companies operate. In order to have AI, you have to train your software. You have to train it on data. One of the reasons you don't get good consistency is some of the data is on bad data. So for instance, some of these companies, and they will never tell you this unless you ask, and they may not even give you the right answer, but there are loads and loads of publicly available imaging studies that have been created and curated so different companies can train on that data. That data may not be really good data. It's hard to say, but if you have bad garbage coming in, you're going to have garbage coming out. So number one is, where do they get their data from? The second one is sometimes the data is too good. So for instance, in the United States, there was a joke about 5 years ago that 75% of all the training data in the United States came from Boston and San Francisco. Because the Harvard system and UCF and Stanford, they were taking all their data and they were using it to curate companies. And these companies eventually created a product. So the challenge is that if you, in your practice, you may not have the same equipment that they do in the Harvard system or UCSF. And to try to replicate their results on your equipment is really, really hard to do. And I can speak from that from a personal standpoint. The other thing, too, is equipment variation. If I'm creating a company and I want to optimize results, I want to use the exact same equipment, I want to use the exact same acquisition protocols, the exact same matrices, and I want someone who's a subspecialist interpreting the studies. Now, I don't know about your practice, but in our practice where we have about 30 MRs, we have different field strength, different ages, different platforms, and different people interpreting those studies. So there's a lot of variability. So again, that's one of the reasons that you have this discrepancy. The other thing, and this is being talked about more and more, is bias. So I'll give you a couple of examples. In the United States, when we have breast cancers, in general, they're relatively small cancers. But if you come from a country that has very low resources, by the time some women present for mammography, the cancers are huge and they've completely replaced the breast tissue. So there's certain AI algorithms for breast imaging. They're not trained to see these advanced cancers. By definition, an AI algorithm is always training itself. There's something called backpropagation where it creates an output, it determines whether it's right or wrong, and then it goes back and it does an internal correction and it tries again. It's just like the human brain thinks. It's how we train residents, right? If you train a resident, they don't get the diagnosis right, well, they're going to learn why they didn't get it right and they're going to try harder again. So the challenge is in the United States is that once you have an algorithm and you purchase it, it locks it. It doesn't allow it to train. And that's because once the FDA has cleared that algorithm and you buy it, the FDA is trying to protect itself so the algorithm cannot learn. So the point is that once you have an algorithm and can't learn, and you put in a lot of variation, a lot of protocols, that's why another reason your accuracy and what you're receiving is not as good as you thought it was. And then finally, overfitting is kind of like cheating, okay? In the sense that, you know, I've written a few papers in my life, and you always run the risk of saying, I need to find the p-value. I need to find that sweet spot so I can get my paper accepted, right? I've never done it myself, but I'm just saying there's that temptation. So when it comes to these software products, they want to make sure that they can get their accuracy to a certain level. And sometimes they'll fiddle with the data a little bit just to get to a certain level. So the point is that these are all things that are under the hood, and you're only going to find out about them if you ask the question. So if you are going to be making these purchases and you are going to be analyzing these different companies, I would strongly advise you to try to keep these eight things in mind and at least ask the companies and say, get some answers to those and see what they say. Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. And so I would suggest right now with 421 products, there's plenty of innovation. But on the other hand, one of the biggest pitfalls that I see in AI is that you spend a lot of time, and I've spent a lot of time negotiating contracts. I've spent a lot of time talking to my IT people because I have to make sure the algorithms that we get can be plugged into our radiology information systems. I have to plug it into my PACS systems. So I spend a ton of time trying to do the wiring, right? Once I get the product, I don't know if it's working or not. And so it's possible you may be getting this information and you may be assuming it at a certain accuracy level, but you may not be. Once you purchase the product, try to verify it. But the dirty little secret right here that I've seen in my dual roles is that if I'm in an academic center and I convince my administration to buy the product and I'm not paying for it, I don't really care because it's in the back, it's running in the back. And if I want to use it, I can use it, right? But if I'm in a private practice setting and I have to purchase that product and that comes out of my margin, my annual margin, then I want to make darn sure that what I'm getting is working. So I don't know if you all are in a private or an academic center, but certainly if you have the ability to do your validation, please do that. Otherwise, you're throwing money down the drain. And one thing I will say about Carpal is that they have a fantastic validation tool. So what Carpal does allow you to do is that you can have 7 or 8 different chest nodule evaluations, and you can run it on your own platforms, and you can actually compare which one works best in your environment. So their validation tool is actually really, really good. So I would strongly support that. Now, one of the funny things about happening in AI is that I've been going to AI talks now for like 7 or 8 years. And I go to a talk and people say, well, AI in radiology, it's doing this. Is it efficient? Is it not efficient? And one of the other points that I want to make to you all is that I always talk about the radiology value stream match. If I talk about artificial intelligence and you're in a radiology department, realize there's more to just reading the studies. So if you're running a department or you're trying to improve your efficiency, artificial intelligence has been used for scheduling. It can be used for protocoling. One of the biggest areas for AI, and I'll show some data on this later, is that if you've purchased a new MR or CT scanner within the last 2 years, you're actually using AI because the AI has been integrated into the CTs and the MRs for protocol acquisition. So people say, AI is not making you more efficient. Well, if you have a new scanner, it has already made you more efficient. You're just not using it. So when you do go to these various talks and people talk about efficiency and value adds, in the back of your mind, think about what part of this value stream are they talking about? It can be used for the workflow enhancements. So this is actually a big thing. Some of the companies right now will do the triaging tool. And the triaging tool has been around now for about 5 or 6 years. So what it does do is that if you have a long work list, so if you're in a practice and you walk in, you only have like 5 on your list, you don't need that tool. But I know for a fact in Australia, there are lots of big teleradiology groups. Like there's IMED, there's Sonic. You know, the list is massive, right? There are hundreds of cases on the list. And so one of the big areas that can be done is that they have abilities to triage, especially for brain hemorrhages or pneumothoraces, et cetera. So what it'll do, it'll pick up that, then it'll move it to the top of the list. So that's a major workflow enhancement. And then probably this is what we're most used to right now. This is the diagnostic utility. So for instance, if I'm reading a brain MRI, or it should be a head CT, it can help me pick up the brain hemorrhages. So when I go to the majority of the talks in AI, most of the talks are really focused on this. And it's always funny because I go to these talks and I hear what's not helping with my efficiency. Sometimes you get alert fatigue. I don't know if you've ever read off an AI, but if there's something abnormal, you'll get a heat map or you'll get an arrow or a box. Depending on how you set up your algorithms, you may go nuts trying to say that the algorithm is wrong. But this is something that I've really found helpful for me. This has improved my efficiency by 20%. And there are some companies out there that provide, using a large language model, generate an automated conclusion generator, an impression. And I remember when I first tried this, I'm like, this isn't going to work. I mean, I'm a subspecialty head and neck radiologist, and I'm talking about the parotid gland and various crazy pathologies. And I couldn't believe it. After a year, my efficiency went up by 20% because I never realized the cognitive energy and the time it took me to read a finding and then come up with a concise conclusion. So this was some data that it's non-scientific, I want to say that, but one of our journal clubs that we had about 5 months ago, one of my fellows was super interested in AI, just really, really interested in AI. And they were more interested in implementation and how it was being used and how it was scaled. And he did such a great job that I really leaned into it. And so we created a very informal survey. But overall, the data's been pretty consistent. So we asked some questions about AI. It's the same question I ask you. Are you using any form of AI in your radiology practice? And the answer that we've got is actually 78%. Now, when you look at this, everyone's getting FOMO. Like, what am I missing out, right? Why am I behind the curve, right? But then we peel back the question and we said, are you using AI to help interpret clinical studies, including stroke? So now the answer is 46%. So what caused this drop between 77% and 46%? Any ideas? Let me go back to the value stream. What's that?
Which portion of the value stream are you sitting in? That's the main
Yes, which portion of the value stream are you sitting in? And in general, we think that this big drop right here is because people know that they're using AI in their equipment. So if you already have AI in your equipment, you're up to 77%. So then we ask yourself, are you using AI to interpret clinical studies excluding stroke? So the bottom line is when we pulled out stroke, this dropped from 46% to 38%. So my point is that only 38% or 40% of all radiologists right now, at least globally in our unscientific survey, are using AI to interpret studies. You saw the session by the plenary session, and they showed the famous video for Jeff Hinton. I think everyone saw that, right? He won the Nobel Prize last year in 2024. And basically he said, we should stop training radiologists, right? So I remember when he said this in 2016, there's about a generation of radiologists we lost. I mean, like 5 years of medical students didn't want to go into radiology because they thought that we would be obsolete. So what I want to do is kind of reassure the residents and any medical students that may be here is that this is from a consulting group in the United States. It's called SQ2. And the point that I want to make on this is that they're anticipating a 23% growth in PET, 16% growth in ultrasound, and a 15% growth in CT. And there's no way in that 10-year period we're going to have enough radiologists. So they're predicting in the US somewhere between a 20 and 40% thousand physician shortage, with a lot being radiologists. So the question for the residents here is that will radiologists still have jobs? And the answer is unequivocally yes. Okay, 100%, and we're not going to wait. I think everyone understands that now, but I still hear some remnants of what it was like 7 years ago, these urban myths that were created. Now, one of the nuances that we have in the United States is that our government is not going to pay for AI. They're very, very leery about paying for AI. And what I've heard talking to people in Australia is that you sort of have the same issues about your government not really wanting to pay you for doing AI. So here are some of the things that we've been able to kind of manage. So number one, part of the issues that we have in the US is that our FDA only allows a single point solution. We have been very clever in a way of trying to get around this. So for instance, the US has certain ways that we can expand our practice. So there's certain artificial intelligence softwares that if you can prove to the government that you can avoid an invasive procedure and reduce the morbidity, the government will pay for that. But they're very, very targeted. So I'm talking about softwares that we talked today was if you have a pulmonary nodule, there are softwares that can help characterize it, whether it's benign or malignant. And the reason they approve the payment for that is that if you can avoid a biopsy, you can avoid the complications, you can avoid the payments. Cardiac. In order to look at cardiac function and viability, you have to undergo a cardiac catheterization. There are CTs and softwares out there for CT and MR that can allow you to get that same information non-invasively. Now, I don't do the liver, but there's something called a fatty liver, right? There's a liver down here, right? In order to make the diagnosis of a fatty liver, you have to biopsy it. But again, there's softwares that prevent biopsy. So in certain targeted areas, you can actually get paid for AI, but the vast majority of this, you're not going to. So I think this scared the crap out of me, because this happened 3 weeks ago. So I'm a head and neck guy, right? And you know, this was the original study, right? And so you can see this mass right here, right? So there's a big tumor here. So I read out this study, and I thought I did really well. I was like, okay, the tumor's gone. They put a flap in, and they had a neck dissection. So I had a really nice dictation, and I felt really good about myself. It was great. So that evening, I'm flying out to the airport, and I get a phone call. And it started off, hey, how's it going? Anytime you get a phone call and someone say, how's it going? Something's not going well, right? So it turns out at that time, at least at the university where I'm at, we have a very large AI presence. They started taking the neck CTs. And when you do the neck CTs, you catch part of the brain, right? They were taking the neck CTs and then they were running it through our brain aneurysm protocol. So, you know, right at the top, you can see the vessels enhancing. And they called me and they said, well, we did our brain aneurysm algorithm on you, and there's a brain aneurysm. And I'm like, what? And so this was the actual study right here. It was a hot spot, and then right there was a 3 millimeter aneurysm, a 2 or 3 millimeter aneurysm, which I would never have seen before. So when I look at real benefits of AI, you know, for me, this is not opportunistic screening. But on the other hand, if I have an AI algorithm and we have certain studies that have blind spots, and the blind spots for me in the neck are the top of the bottom of the brain and the chest, it kind of makes sense to me in the future that we're going to be running these type of studies through a screening algorithm, not necessarily to make more money, but that's a true value add when it comes to artificial intelligence in my practice. Because the last thing that I want to do, I mean, I don't want to get sued for it, but I also don't want the patient to die of an aneurysm. They look back and say, it was there. You know, it really makes you. So, anyway. So I'm going to end with this slide. And basically, this is that value proposition that everyone knows about. And you can see I've got Australia and New Zealand here. Is as you go to these talks, you're going to hear a lot of opinions. And everything that I'm giving you is an opinion. It's not fact. It's just an opinion. And I think it's really important that you understand your own individual practices and how you're going to be using artificial intelligence in order to add value in your practice. Now, value is a weird term, but each one of you is going to have a different definition. So you're going to have to figure out how to increase quality. So for me, a personal experience was picking up that aneurysm in the brain that I just missed on a neck CT. I mean, that's a big quality add for me. You know, can it improve your access? Because when it comes to Australia, you're very similar to certain parts of the United States. So you have your population hubs on the eastern side of the country. In the United States, we have our population hubs. We have them in Boston and San Francisco, and everywhere in the middle, there's not a lot. So one of the ways that you can use your own practice, especially the shortage, is to figure out a way to triage your studies. And so for me, it's looking at the ability for AI to exclude disease, so a negative predictive value. And then finally, the cost. So from us, I'm a big fan of the large language models because we were able to really make myself more efficient. So therefore, my individual costs have decreased. So there's no right or wrong answer. Each one of these is individualized to you, but you're just going to have to decide which one works best for you. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions.